From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Burke, and in every Blue Sky episode, we'll be speaking to leaders, researchers, and thinkers whose stories and insights will remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. We find ourselves living in a time of unprecedented change and innovation. While there's much to be excited about, we also have a collective sense of fear and trepidation about the future and what these new technologies might release. My guest today recognizes that while there are certainly things that can go wrong, we should not fear the future, but rather appreciate that as a species we have made tremendous progress to date and that the rate of our continuous improvement should only accelerate. Jamie Metzl is one of the world's leading authorities on the implications of the intersecting AI, genetics, and biotechnology revolutions, and how governments, corporations, organizations, and individuals can ride the wave of these unprecedented transformations to build their best possible futures. A technology and healthcare futurist and geopolitical expert, he is author of the international bestseller Hacking Darwin: Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity, and the sci-fi thrillers Genesis Code and Eternal Sonata. His latest book, Superconvergence: How the Genetics, Biotech, and AI Revolutions Will Transform Our Lives, Work, and World, was published in June of 2024 and will be the focus of much of our conversation. Jamie is founder and chair of the global social movement One Shared World, a senior fellow of the Atlantic Council, a faculty member of NextMed Health, and a Singularity University expert. Jamie previously served in the U.S. National Security Council, State Department, Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and as a human rights officer for the United Nations in Cambodia. In 2019, he was appointed to the World Health Organization Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. I hope you enjoy this Blue Sky conversation with Jamie Metzl as much as I did. Jamie Metzl, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Thanks so much, Bill. Really my pleasure to be here.
I absolutely loved your book, Superconvergence, and I'm one of those people who likes to read the acknowledgments. And in your acknowledgments, you described yourself. You said, "I've tried to write a balanced book, but recognize that I am by nature and belief an optimist." You said two things there, nature and belief. Could you talk about, have you always seen yourself as an optimist? And then how much of that has been informed by your study and your work?
Yeah. So I've always been an optimist. I mean, when you talk to even my mother or people's parents and say you have multiple kids, are there some who are sunnier kids and others who are darker kids? Just from early on, I was always a sunny kid. I was always seeing the happy stories and always gravitating towards optimism and, frankly, optimistic people.
Yep.
And then as I've grown older and the work that I've done, I haven't shied away from the world's hardest thing. I'm the child. My father is technically a Holocaust survivor. My PhD looked at the Cambodian genocide. I lived for 2 years in Cambodia. I worked in refugee camps on the Thai-Cambodian border. So the worst thing somebody can be, in my view, is just a blind idealist or a blind optimist. And so it's my view, what I want to do is I want to stare into the worst possible things and not shy away from them. But at the same time, to recognize that there are also great stories in the Cambodian refugee camps. There were stories of rebirth. I'm a lucky story that my family, my father and grandparents survived, and now I'm here. And in life, I just feel like it's a choice. It's the same fact patterns in front of all of us, and we have a choice. Are we going to say, "Hey, I'm hopeful. I'm a realistic optimist," which doesn't mean blind, but I'm going to do what needs to be done. And so, I was talked to a lot of people, obviously, in the context of my work about AI and other technologies. And people are primed by the media to say, oh, to be AI doomers, we're all screwed. And for sure, there are and will be downsides of AI, just like there have been downsides of every technology, agriculture, industrialization, nuclear energy, everything. And there are incredible positive stories. We need to be honest about both sides. But I think that if we work hard enough, we can tip the scales in the direction of the kinds of futures that we'd like to build.
Well, Jamie, we're off to a very good start because I agree 100% with everything you just said. And it's funny, I was just working on a past episode where we referenced Viktor Frankl for the umpteenth time. And you mentioned your family's history. And again, staring at the very worst, but having a sense of hope and purpose can make such a huge difference. So in your book, you just mentioned AI, but I want to start with, you do a great job with statistics. And I'm not a math major, nor like you, I haven't taken a biology class since high school. But these are statistics that really jumped out at me. I'd love to start here before we even get into technology. A century ago in your book, you say there were 2 billion people globally and a 15% literacy rate. The easy math says that's 300 million people who, as you said, could fully participate in wisdom sharing. Today, 8 billion people, 85% literacy rate, 6.8 billion, a 23 times increase from a century ago. Can we just start there with just how many more people are actually literate and engaged in wisdom sharing?
Yeah, I mean, you read the numbers, but the key thing is, well, what does it mean? And perhaps one of the greatest forces in the world as we know it is human imagination. And just to have so many more minds and so many more empowered minds, and then empowered minds connected to each other, benefiting from these incredible tools, which are huge multipliers. It means that every one of us, your starting point isn't just the little pool of knowledge in your community. It's all of knowledge that has been accrued by humans over many millions of years. And every new idea, every new invention that any person comes up with immediately gets shared. And so we're constantly resetting the baseline for everybody else. And that works for positive stories, how to do good things. And it works for negative stories, that the bad guys are also empowered. But because I certainly believe that in the right circumstances, humans do want to do the right thing. I think that's a natural. We have these impulses certainly to destroy and fight, but we have a lot of impulses which are biological in nature to collaborate and cooperate. As a matter of fact, that's one of the superpowers of our species. We can cooperate and collaborate at scales greater than many, if not most, other animals. So we do have these capabilities. We do have all of this brain power. And if we organize ourselves in a remotely positive way, I think that odds are we can do great things. We'll also do terrible things, but we'll do great things.
Well, yeah. And I think a lot of us feel like, oh my gosh, things are changing so quickly and I can't keep up. And the fact is, they're right. It is changing remarkably quickly. You quoted Ray Kurzweil. The 21st century will be equivalent to 20,000 years of progress, which is 1,000 times greater than the 20th century, which was no slouch to change. Great line, by the way. It's staggering. So you take these numbers we shared about literacy rate and the population, then you combine that with new technologies, and you wind up with these incredible possibilities. One of the things you start off talking about in your book is around biology, and it's something that really can frighten people. They think of, Frankenstein and awful things that we could create. But one of the points you make is that you say biology by its nature is fluid. We've been evolving and changing for 3.8 billion years, and there's a lot of changes that we've already made in biology to animals and plants. And so could you talk a little bit about that? And then maybe we'll kick things off by talking about healthcare, because it's something that's near and dear to my heart and something I think that is underappreciated.
So we don't see ourselves evolving. We don't see, at least in humans, biology happening, except when we have kids.
Yeah.
And then there's like all these miracles that unfold. And one of them is you have let's say a 30-year-old biological mother and a 30-year-old biological father, and you have a kid that's not biologically 60, but biologically 0. So you just kind of see this stuff happening. And then when we're having these kids, it's roughly half of the genetics of one parent, roughly half of genetics of the other parent. But then there's some genetics that is just de novo. It's new, not reflecting either parent. And that's evolution. That's nature. That's biology, is not preserving one thing exactly as it is. The nature of biology has changed. That's the random mutation in the Darwinian formula of random mutation and natural selection. And so then when we kind of think about that, I think there's this natural impulse of, oh, don't mess with biological systems.
Right.
And yet we're here because of agriculture, which is a form of radical biotechnology. Even the Peruvian highland farmers are engaged in radical biotechnology. Our own genetics and our own biology have been changed as a result of our migration, as a result of our relationship with domesticated animals and all sorts of other things. So in a way, we humans tend to have this natural fallacy, like the old thing is natural and pure,
right,
and the new thing is scary and dangerous. But I say this all the time: go to your local Whole Foods, go to the sustainable organic fruits and vegetables section, and you will find nothing that is not the result of radical biotechnology. And the difference between all of those foods and the GMO crops that so many people are afraid of, not fully logically, in my view, and those foods, the sustainable organic foods from Whole Foods, and their wild precursors is radical. The difference in the wild precursors and the foods that we're eating, many of which have been irradiated and had all kinds of manipulations, and the sustainable organic Whole Foods and genetically modified crops, the difference between the wild and domesticated is thousands, more than thousands of times bigger than between the Whole Food stuff and GMOs.
Jamie Metzl is an optimist, and one who is not afraid to, as he says, stare into the worst about humanity. He's the child of Holocaust survivors and has also worked in some of the toughest, most challenged places on the planet. He sees technology not necessarily as a good in and of itself, but as an enabler of the tremendous power of human imagination. And he's comfortable that these will turn out all right, because in general, humans want to do the right thing. I learned a lot from his book, Superconvergence, especially about this concept that biology is fluid, especially in the case of the food we eat.
Let's stick with food and as you could describe it, agriculture. To your point, you state that 88% of American corn has been genetically modified. I don't think most people understand that. And these have not only resulted in many cases, better tasting food and that sort of thing, but the amount of product we can harvest from a hectare or from a couple of acres has grown fivefold, I think you said, in the last 80 years. The numbers are staggering. And in some cases, it even has ancillary benefits. For example, genetically modified crops that are more resistant to insects, so you don't use as many herbicides and insecticides. So there's all these benefits we don't think about. Can you touch on a few of those and amplify that?
Yeah, so it's not just GMO. Over the past 70 years, we've had a revolution in agriculture that has radically expanded agricultural productivity. Certainly, it's the manipulation of seeds through the Green Revolution. It's farm mechanization, it's fertilizers, it's irrigation systems, now it's information systems. All of these things, that's what has allowed us to so radically expand agricultural productivity. And it is that expansion of agricultural productivity that's made it possible to have this massive increase. You talked about it before, quadrupling the number of humans alive on planet Earth over the last 100 years. So it's really incredible. And we've done it as a result of our science and technology. And as we move toward 10 billion people a few decades from now, if we just continue to do agriculture as we're doing it, which is not, this isn't the way we've done it for 10,000 years. This is the way we've done it for 100 years, even less. We're going to have to decimate our entire planet and destroy all of our wild spaces to grow crops, because people in poorer parts of the world getting wealthier are going to want to live lives like us and eat diets like ours. So we're not going to do that. So we have to find ways of increasing agricultural productivity, essentially growing more food with less inputs of land, fertilizer, water, CO2 emissions, and things like that. And just like I said, agriculture is a form of radical biotechnology. We need to apply our new generations of technologies in order to do this. And I write about this in the book for plant agriculture, thinking about manipulating the genomes inside of plants, which is different than transgenic GMOs, transferring genetic codes essentially from one plant to another, which can really be great, whether it's for the GMO corn or GMO rice or other things, but also just turning on or off genes that already exists within certain plants to make it possible for them to grow in climate stressed places, to grow when they're exposed to greater salinity because of rising sea levels or also sorts of things. So it's a very positive story, but like everything, that doesn't mean it doesn't have dangers or potential downsides that need to be managed.
Sure. You've mentioned a few times the growing population, and obviously that's happening both because we are maintaining reproductive rates, but also living longer lives. And a lot of that I think we take for granted, the rate of infant mortality, the just being able to live into later years because of all the incredible healthcare that we receive. And you write a lot about how it's only going to get incredibly better in the next several years. One of the things I was really pleased to see you give some time to is the COVID vaccine. And I'd love to just spend a minute or two on that, because one of my frustrations is, as we've come through largely to the other side of the COVID pandemic, we still have a lot of issues. The vaccine became so politicized that it became this divisive thing. And rarely, if ever, do you hear someone pause, other than someone like yourself, and say, this vaccine was kind of a miracle. The fact that we did it so quickly, the fact that you and I are sitting here vaccinated, walking around without a mask, if this had happened 20 years ago, we'd probably still be working on a vaccine. Could you talk about why that was such an amazing thing and what was so unique about this vaccine and why we should feel better about it?
Yeah, I'll start with a story, and then I'll talk about these vaccines. So a few years ago, I was down in Nashville, and I was being recorded for something, for a video, and I was getting my makeup done, and the woman who was doing it, I can't remember, her name was I think it was Cheyenne, and I was saying, "Oh, Cheyenne, do you have Native American ancestors?" And she did. And then we just started talking, and this issue of vaccines came up, and she said, "Well, I'm not taking these vaccines." And I said, I totally understand that, because doing anything with our bodies is a big deal. We need to be thoughtful about it. And I said, but from your name, I'm guessing that you have Native American ancestry. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, that when after Columbus arrived in the Americas over the next couple of hundred years, about 90% of the entire native population died from the diseases that came over from Europe. Smallpox, measles, probably the most important among them, which are now, we have vaccines against both of those things. If your ancestors could have had vaccines for smallpox and measles that would have saved their lives, do you think they would have taken them or said, and which would have been perfectly legitimate, hey, this seems foreign, it seems unnatural, we have these natural lives? You could totally understand these Native American populations who didn't have the whole background in the European scientific revolution saying that. But for us to say that, when we know that these COVID-19 vaccines, which like all vaccines are by no means perfect, are some of the most efficacious vaccines in history, it just raises a question. So coming to your point about your question about the vaccines. I mean, it was really incredible. It went from January of 2020, when finally, after a lot of baloney, the genome of the SARS-CoV-2 virus was released. From that point until the first mRNA vaccine was put into a human's arm was 11 months. Before that, the record had been 4 years, and that was an outlier because people had expected maybe 10, maybe 20 years, maybe never. And so it was just, and the reason why we were able to speed up was because of the tools of intersecting AI, genetics, and biotechnology revolutions. It was computer analysis. It was machine learning analytics, which is very different from the old trial and error method from the polio vaccine. So it's an incredible story. It saved millions, perhaps tens of millions of lives. And yet there's a lot of fear around vaccines. And in a way, the very thing that made it so miraculous, that these things happened so quickly, made people not trust them. And then the second thing was that the field of public health had changed. Public health is only about its modern form, about 100 years old. And basically the idea of public health is not that you have to have an asterisk after everything you say, wash your hands, asterisk, unless you have a soap allergy. People say, hey, here are kind of general practices that are a good idea. And so there's absolutely no question that all in all, the COVID vaccines were fantastic vaccines. But it's also true that there probably are subgroups of people like teenage boys where the risk-reward ratio may be a little bit different. And so it may be that for teenage boys, they didn't need two boosters of the COVID vaccine. And it's a trade-off, because if you say, hey, everybody stay with your COVID disrupted lives, and we're going to spend 4 years testing these vaccines, you can do it. And in 4 years, you'll probably have marginally better vaccines. But what are the costs of those 4 years? So it's a balance.
Superconvergence is full of statistics and trends that surprise me, and the numbers around agricultural production are stunning. Going back to Thomas Malthus, we've long held a concern that our population growth will outpace our ability to feed ourselves. And yet, we continue to innovate our way to greater yields to meet our growing demand. More on that soon. And I was glad that Jamie spent time in his book describing how remarkable it was that we developed effective COVID vaccines as quickly as we did. I've said many times that there's a tight link between gratitude and optimism, and failing to appreciate this achievement that helped us end our lockdowns and largely get back to our normal lives is a mistake. Now, back to my blue sky conversation with Jamie Metzl.
More on healthcare, targeted medicines. You described treating not the disease like we do today, but treating the patient. These targeted medicines have huge promise and are already coming on the scene. Can you talk a little bit about why we should be optimistic about the future of targeted medicine?
Yeah, well, I think it's great. So let's start with where we are. In the terms of healthcare, this is by far the best time to have ever been alive as a human. I mean, it's so much better than it ever was. And the reason why, when you are traveling in some other part of the world and you get sick, you can go into the hospital and they can treat you, is because we have essentially what I call generalized medicine, which is based on population averages. If you're a human and we get your white count or we get whatever, we can say something meaningful about you. And I think it's great. That's the foundation of almost all of our healthcare. And again, better than anything we've ever done in the past. But now we're entering the new phase of our healthcare of personalized medicine, also known as precision medicine or precision healthcare, where you're treated not because of you're one of 8 billion humans, but because you are you and you're one of one yous. And so how do we know who you are? So we need to get all of your medical information, all of your history, but more your whole genome sequenced. And humans, we're not just genomes walking around with a bunch of other stuff. we're a system of systems, and we're developing the tools to better understand all of those complex systems and their interaction. And as we do that, we are developing the capacity to treat you based on you personally, to say, well, all right, you're going to get a treatment for cancer or something else, rather than having a generalized trial and error. It's like, all right, you have lung cancer. We're going to try you on this. If that doesn't work, we'll try you on that. If that doesn't work, we'll try you on a third thing. Is to say, we're going to look at your biology, your sequenced genome, and say, is there a way to order different treatments, or to say, all right, based on your biology, we think this is going to work the best. And that's the promise of precision healthcare, whether it's for taking drugs or a whole new field of gene therapy, where you can either take out your cells and modify them so they can be better able to fight your individual cancer, or the fields of regenerative medicine, using your cells to grow new things, new skin, new tissues, new organs, either outside of your body, inside of your body, or with the field of xenotransplantation, perhaps increasingly inside of pigs, maybe baboons at some point. And as we go for this first jump from generalized to precision, we're going to need huge amounts of data. And then as we bring together our large pools of high quality data, greater computing power, and stronger algorithms, we're going to be able to understand deeper patterns, more complex patterns in biology. And that's going to open the door to new kinds of interventions, which is going to shift us to that next jump from precision to predictive and preventive health, where we'll realize we live within a range of biological possibility. And the name of the game of healthcare, and maybe of life, is to live at the upper end of that possibility, and then say, well, how can we go beyond it? So any of us who are vaccinated, like you, Bill, wearing glasses, whatever, we are already living above our innate biological capacity. And that's great.
Right.
We can't do it everywhere, but we're going to have to be strategic on where we want to do it.
And it's incredible because some of what you're talking about is out there several years. Some of it's happening right now. And I've talked to people who are involved in the behavioral health, mental health space, and already targeted precision medicine for, like you said, there's often trial and error. So someone's depressed, has anxiety. Well, let's try this medicine. It doesn't work for you. Let's try this one. Now they're categorizing different types of depression and anxiety in ways where you can meet it head on the first try. It's remarkable. You had statistics, I had never seen these before, of name brand drugs that I know by name mostly because I see ads on football games, but and the percentage of the populations for whom they don't work blew me. I mean, some of these household names, they're working in like 4 to 5% of the people who take them. Can you talk about that and how that'll change?
Yeah, it's astronomical. And that's this whole trial and error, and it's very expensive. And we societally are paying the price, even for people who aren't paying themselves through insurance, or even poor people. We collectively are paying, getting close to 20% of our entire GDP on healthcare. And it's not delivering more health. We are less healthy than many societies that are spending way less on healthcare. And part of it is we have all these drugs, these blockbuster drugs that take such a long time to develop. They only work for a relatively small percentage of the population. We keep going through this trial and error process, and it's just, it's not terrible, but it's certainly not an optimal way to do healthcare.
So you talked earlier at your first comments about looking at some of the scariest stuff in the world and coming through it with a sense of hope and possibility. We all know that one of the things that causes a lot of dread these days is climate change, for good reason. We're seeing the impacts already, and it's real and it's happening. And one of the big drivers of climate change or increased carbon and emissions in the environment is agriculture. And you take a really deep and I found fascinating dive into this, and even got to the point where you said it's ironic, but our increased access to technology and creation of technology could actually rewild the world in a way. So can we talk? It's a big question, but you talk about everything from plant agriculture to animals to synthetic meat. So pick your entry point and paint a picture for us about why we should be excited about this.
So I already talked about plant agriculture. So agriculture is one of our most CO2 emitting activities that we do as humans. Agricultural land is about half of all arable land on Earth, and the other part are all these wild spaces that make our planet livable and that allow these animals to survive, and we need them to survive for us to survive. And as I said before, we can't just cut down all of the wild spaces to grow more crops. But 3/4 of our agricultural land, 3/4 of our agricultural emissions are allocated toward animal agriculture. And so that means either growing food to feed to animals or grazing lands for animals. And the calorie conversion rate for cattle to humans is 25 to 1. For cattle. So I said that wrong, but basically you need to feed a cow, 25 calories of plants to get 1 calorie of animal protein. So the right answer is, of course, for everyone to just become a vegetarian. All in all, we'd be healthier. If everyone overnight became a vegetarian, we would have no choice but to rewild massive amounts of Earth. It would be great for all of these animals. Our oceans would bounce back very quickly. It's just not going to happen. I'm not a vegetarian. My grandparents, when they came to America, had a little kosher butcher shop in Kansas City. You know, I'm from Kansas City. I love barbecue, probably not as much as the next guy, but more than the next guy. And so, and people, even with all of our awareness around vegetarianism in the United States, in Europe, per capita consumption of animal products is going up every year. And so I think we need to say, well, hey, can we think a little bit differently about agriculture? Because 75% of the animal products we consume aren't coming from old McDonald's farm. They're coming from industrial animal agriculture. And I encourage everybody to go visit an industrial chicken plant, industrial cow plant, whatever. You will not be happy. You won't like what you see. A lot of animal cruelty. We're slaughtering 72 billion land animals per year, 200 million metric tons of fish, the huge environmental climate impacts, deforestation, increased risk of pandemics, overuse of antibiotics to help these animals grow more quickly and to prevent them from getting sick because we're cramming them in these small spaces. And that's creating antibiotic resistance, which is undermining healthcare. So there are all these negative externalities. So one answer is don't eat animal products. Another question is, well, can we get the animal products that people seem to want, myself included, but can we do it in a more sustainable way? And it turns out these tools of AI, genetics, and biotech are in the early stages of suggesting an alternative. There's a whole field called cell-cultured animal products. Now they call it cultivated meat, but it's also for milks, where you take the stem cells from the healthiest living animals you can find, you expand them in a laboratory, grow them in industrial bioreactors, and now you can have animal products that are biologically identical to ones you would find just from animals, from dead animals. So we can have these animal products that we want. And some of those products could even be better. You could have milks and meats that have less of the kind of harmful fats that we don't want. And we could have more of the healthy, the omega fats, things that we might actually want. So it's the early stages. There are always issues of cost and scale. The first cell-cultured hamburger in the Netherlands in 2013 had a production cost of around $325,000. Now it's $10. So the cross curves are all in the right direction. And there also is just a cultural shift of people being comfortable eating these kinds of foods. And so we're just in the early stages. But I think that we need to have holistic views of our lives, of our habits, of our world, and recognize that every choice that we make is connected to bigger trends in the world.
Well, $10 in New York isn't bad for a hamburger. So again,
exactly,
we're on the right path.
Exactly.
Jamie introduces a lot of provocative ideas here. There's no doubt, he says, that embracing vegetarianism would be good for us and our planet. Yet when he looks around the world at the increasing rate of the consumption of animal products, he concludes that a complete shift away from these foods is not likely. The concept of cell-cultured animal products can be a tough one to imagine, but it's coming, and we'd be wise to keep an open mind to innovations in this field. And precision medicine is something we've mentioned in other episodes of this show, and there is no doubt that we are on the brink of major breakthroughs here, and many of us will live to see advances in this field that are hard for us to even imagine today. And now, to our final segment with Jamie Metzl.
You and I both know, as you described that, there are people listening who get uncomfortable when you talk about growing meat in a lab. And why should they be less uncomfortable and even comfortable? Talk to us about the similarities, differences, and why we should embrace this.
Yeah, so I don't want to tell anyone they should be comfortable with things that they're uncomfortable with. But what I would say is, if we want to eat animal products, we'll stick with this example. We just have different choices. And so in the beginning of our conversation, you asked me about being an optimist. And I said, yes, I'm an optimist. And I'm the child of a Holocaust survivor. And I've worked in refugee camps and spent a decent amount of time in Afghanistan. And I've tried to look into the darkest places. And so if you're a person who's eating animal products and saying, oh, I'm not comfortable with cell-cultured animal products, which I totally get, what I would encourage you to do is do a little bit of research about the products that you're eating now. Go and explore, look at even the milk. The average lifespan of a dairy cow who's just living their life is 20 years. The average life of the dairy cows that are producing the milk that you, dear listener, are having every morning in your Starbucks latte is 5 years. Not only that, they have been modified so just to produce milk. So they all have arthritis. It is a miserable, horrible life. And so you say, all right, well, that or the chickens that are crammed into these little spaces, or the pigs that live their entire lives in like a shoebox. And so you say, well, that's uncomfortable. How uncomfortable is it for you to drink milk that is cell cultured, that doesn't come from that cow that lived 5 very painful, unhappy years? That's up to you. And so I just think that we have been shielded from the negative stories. And again, I'm not a vegetarian. I actually think that there will always be a place for premium animal products, maybe from animals that are allowed to graze freely. But I just think that we should think a little bit differently about the mix. And part of that process is just informing ourselves about the trade-offs, because nothing in life is free. It's always a trade-off. And that's why I've written the book. And that's why I have 3 chapters on agriculture, just to help walk people through these arguments. Because most people, if you just start, hey, who'd be comfortable eating cell-cultured meat? Nobody raised their hand. But if you walk them through everything I just said, everybody raises their hand.
Right. And even things like the adoption of veggie burgers and those things, people get there eventually. And it's like you said, it's worth doing the research and worth reading this book, Superconvergence, because you explained it really well, even to someone with a brain like mine that doesn't always get his head around these concepts very well. You also do, and you've referenced this a few times, you also aren't afraid to look at what could go wrong. And so I think one of my concerns is that tends to be people's first point of departure is what could go wrong, as opposed to starting to weigh the trade-offs. What could go wrong in all these technologies, and how should we be thinking about sort of making sure the guardrails are appropriate or the checkpoints are there? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So like with every technology we've ever developed, lots could go wrong. If you say agriculture, was agriculture a good story? You'd say, oh, yeah, I love agriculture. But then you'd say, oh, but also agriculture gave us these massive wars and nuclear holocaust and pandemics. You think, oh, I'm not for those. So because of these technologies, like all technologies, some things will go right and some things will go wrong. And the name of the game is how can we increase the odds of the good stuff and decrease the odds of the bad stuff? And part of that is just being honest about what are some of the bad things. And there's an unlimited list of things that could potentially go wrong. In the book, I highlight 3. One is synthetic biology pandemics, because I was deeply and still am deeply involved in the question of COVID-19 origins. I believe that the by far most likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic was a research-related accident in Wuhan. But we're entering an age of synthetic biology where we could have much worse pandemics generated by humans. It's the flip side of the great story of the vaccines. I was a member of the World Health Organization Expert Committee on Human Genome Editing, created after the Chinese CRISPR babies were born in 2018. So my last book, Hacking Darwin, was all about this, about the future of genetic engineering. And it's great. We're going to want to genetically alter future embryos because we're going to be able to take future children who would have deadly genetic and maybe other disorders, and with a few small tweaks, turn them into those exact same kids who, instead of dying when they're 5, live until they're 90 or 100. So why wouldn't we do that? Having said that, those technologies can easily be abused. We can easily commodify what it means to be a human. We can do, like happened in China, Nuremberg-style human experimentation. So we need to really look at it. The third example that I talk about in the book is gene drives, which is basically using the tools of genome editing, like CRISPR-Cas9, and basically attaching them to the sexual reproduction mechanisms of fast reproducing species like mosquitoes. And so basically with that, you could introduce one mosquito into a population of mosquitoes that are carrying malaria. And when that mosquito mates with another mosquito, now that other mosquito has this basically toolkit as part of their sexual reproduction. And pretty soon you can change the entire population of mosquitoes to make it impossible for them to pass on malaria. And if you do that, you could save nearly 1 million lives per year. But at the same time, we're talking about complex ecosystems. And no matter how much we think we understand, we don't understand everything. So all of these things are a balance. And although I'm very optimistic about what's possible, part of that optimism requires a careful analysis of what could go wrong.
A lot of what you're saying reminds me of Kevin Kelly I had on the show. I'm a huge fan of his. He's another optimistic technophile. And he puts it in a way that you've described too, which is, I'll paraphrase, but he basically says, yesterday's technologies cause today's problems.
It's exactly right.
They're technological solutions. And then today's technologies need, so for example, the Industrial Revolution pulled people out of poverty, it created new economies, but guess what? It belched bad stuff into the air, and now we have climate change, right? So it feels like you're describing a lot of the same possibilities.
It's exactly right. Climate change is a blessing from the perspective of our ancestors who either spent their entire lives fighting against starvation, or the gazillions of people in every civilization who were slaves because that was how we did labor. Industrialization, it's not coincidental that slavery roughly ended when industrialization began. It's not coincidental that agricultural productivity took off, that we have so many more people. So how lucky we are to have climate change, because if someone said, well, climate change or slavery and mass starvation, we'd say, well, let's get climate change a couple hundred years from now. Like that seemed like a good deal. But now, and anything you say. If we say, eat celery, and everybody starts eating celery, we are going to have a global celery problem, and then we're going to have to fix that. It's just the nature of it.
Right. Yeah, his other line that if anyone has their Blue Sky podcast bingo card out, they're probably going to get this one, is he said, if you only read the news, you'll think things have never been worse. But if you read history, you'll realize things have never been better. And you just gave some examples that I think are so true. I'd like to, as we reach the end, this is a line from your book that I think really sums up what I took away as the thrust of your book. You wrote, if we excessively lock ourselves into the present, we'll miss the future. And I feel like this knee-jerk anxiety about new technologies, and AI is sort of the flavor of the month, does make us excessively lock ourselves into the present. Can you just shed a little light on that?
Yeah, I mean, we all have a present bias. Like, oh, the thing that we're doing now, that's natural. Like I talked about with agriculture. Seedless grapes, that's right. Natural. But CRISPR edited grapes, that's unnatural. And so I just think that we need to say that life is a continuum. Civilization is a continuum. And these technologies are neither good nor bad. They're agnostic. And so if somebody said, certainly for an optimist like me and like you, we can just stop all technological innovation now. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And you had to make the decision. I would say it's a bad thing because that's the way our species work. We keep solving problems, doing things differently, but there are downsides. And so if we just say we don't want to have all these technologies because we can imagine correctly that there are these dangers, I think that would cause a real harm.
Well, Jamie Metzl, it has been a pleasure to have you on. I absolutely loved your book. I recommend Superconvergence to everyone. We just tiptoed into the substance of it. It's really well presented, well researched, and I just really appreciate your outlook and your optimism, and I thank you so much for your time on the show.
Thank you, Bill. It's really been my pleasure. When somebody reaches out to you from the Optimism Institute, you're kind of, you have to say yes, because it's like, if you say, oh, they reached out to me from the Optimism Institute, and what'd you say? I told them to F off. That's like bad karma. So well, all the optimists, we have to keep fighting for the good stories we want.
I agree. Thanks so much, Jamie.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill.
I agree with Jamie when he says that we should have a better understanding of the foods we eat today and where they come from before we jump to criticize or fear developing technologies like cell-cultured food. For sure, all technologies can be abused, but steered in the right direction, they can continue to improve our lives just as they have in the past. And as Kevin Kelly told us in an earlier episode of Blue Sky, yesterday's technologies solved yesterday's problems, while also presenting challenges for today. Jamie Metzl credits industrialization, for example, as hastening the end of slavery, while it also left us with a climate change issue requiring new innovations today. His summarizing suggestion is that we should not lock ourselves in the present, despite our natural tendency to do so. And I heartily and optimistically concur. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Jamie Metzl. Before you go, we'd appreciate you leaving us a rating or review, and hope you'll consider subscribing to our podcast to be sure you don't miss any future episodes. This and all Blue Sky episodes are made possible by the incredible editing and mixing done by the team at Sound On Studios. You can learn more about their work at soundonstudios.com. All graphic design and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute are provided by Crush Graphics. That's Crush with a K if you'd like to check out more of their fantastic work at crushgraphics.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.